If you are a regular viewer around here, you will know that I love to cover the Legend of Zelda series. To be more precise, Zelda theories, mysteries, discussions, the occasional top 5, and so much more. Yeah, let's just forget about that one. This series just has such a rich pot of lore to stick your hand into, like Winnie the Pooh when he sees honey. But all of this expansive content actually originates from the 1986 classic, The Legend of Zelda. And whilst not being the most technically advanced game compared to today's standards, it still holds its fair share of mysteries, theories, and unexplained content to cover, and what is becoming a little mini-series on my channel, 5 Great Theories, where I cover a 2D Zelda games to bring more coverage to them, as in my opinion, we need more 2D Zelda game videos on YouTube. But get this, today we have a guest. Everyone, please give a warm welcome to the bread. Let's get this bread. Maybe I got that wrong. Let me try that again. I feel like I missed something out there. Please give a warm welcome to the Bread Pirate.
Ahoy there! Like Hyrule Gamer said, my name is the Bread Pirate. I make videos about Zelda history, and I love me some bread.
As is tradition around here, Mr. Bread, you have the honors of my iconic line.
Hey, grab yourself a snack or grog and send them in to get featured right here. Let's take a look at some of the mysteries and theories in the Zelda game, which started it all. Ganon is actually a genius. Hidden in the deepest room of the Death Mountain Labyrinth is a being filled with rage, the Prince of Darkness, Ganon. Prior to the adventure of Link, he invaded Hyrule Kingdom with his horde of monsters, and no longer bearing any trace of the man known as the Great Thief Ganon, he opposes Link in the form of a demonic beast, bereft of intelligence. But is he? For the longest time, Zelda fans have assumed the worst about the intelligence of Ganon, many going as far as to call him mindless. This is a crime. Even from the limited amount of information we know about the plot of Zelda 1, it's clear that Ganon has a brain. Let's take it step by step, starting with the invasion of Hyrule. Hyrule Historia claims that Ganon invaded Lesser Hyrule, this area right here, in search of the Triforce. Seems straightforward, right? Not quite, because Lesser Hyrule isn't the capital of Hyrule. For that matter, it's a wasteland of enemies, bad terrain, and dangerous mazes. No. In every piece of media surrounding Zelda 1 and 2, the North Castle is the capital of Hyrule, a heavily fortified city with a moat, not the type of place you can waltz right into. I think it's safe to say that this is where the Triforce was being held. And despite being such a difficult city to try and take over, Ganon did it, and he did it without the Triforce of Power. We know this because it says so right in the manual. But poor Ganon wasn't gonna have it off so easy. Zelda threw a wrench in his plans. Following his victory, she escaped to Lesser Hyrule, split the Triforce of Wisdom into 8 parts, and sealed each part in the bottom of a dungeon. She then ordered her servant Impa to secretly find somebody courageous enough to save Hyrule. Ganon, understandably, was furious, so he kidnapped the princess, sent his army into the dungeons to get the pieces of Triforce, and organized a detachment of monsters to hunt Impa. Here's where things get good. Zelda told Impa to secretly find a hero. That's the exact wording in the English and Japanese. Yet, Ganon found out about her escape and knew she would be a threat. Keep in mind, it's not like Impa is going around in the countryside yelling, "I need somebody to help me kill Ganon." She was being sneaky, and Ganon still found her. This proves that Ganon has enough competence to figure out when somebody is going to be a threat to him. Thankfully, Impa was saved by Link, thus beginning the adventure of Zelda 1. But there's one last piece of evidence which demonstrates Ganon's intellect, his fighting style. Ganon in Zelda 1, unlike most other forms of the Demon Beast, attacks Link from hiding, sneaking around the arena in an invisible form and taking pot shots at Link. This form of Ganon relies not on brute force, but on his agility and magic to outsmart Link. All of this goes to show that the Prince of Darkness in Zelda 1 is a competent military commander, a master of intrigue, and a tactical fighter. And I suppose if he's still not a genius, he's at least smarter than a sack of potatoes. Special thanks to Zelda Universe user Instritulis, I think that's how that's said, for inspiring this mini-theory with your post on an alternative timeline for the Zelda series. You did a great job with that timeline, by the way.
At first glance, the map of The Legend of Zelda may seem rather basic and not really connected to any other games in the series, but you'd be wrong. There is actually one location which has appeared multiple times throughout the series, Spectacle Rock. It can be found in the northern regions of Hyrule and consists of 2 large, well, spectacular rocks. And we actually see them in the series a few times after this. In Link's Adventure, they can be found inside Death Mountain. Then again, in A Link to the Past, they can also be found atop Death Mountain in the Light World. Then again in Ocarina of Time, we see what is believed to be Spectacle Rock, yet again, inside Death Mountain. And then in The Wind Waker, we find Spectacle Island, which takes on that same shape of the two rocks. Whilst being more of a reference, could technically be Spectacle Rock. But what really takes the cake, or in this case, the bread, is that in Breath of the Wild, we once again find Spectacle Rock, but now in the Gerudo Highlands. Nintendo themselves haven't commented on this, but there are popular fan theories out there suggesting that this location's presence in all of these games could be a way to connect them in terms of the timeline. Now if you know me, I am not a timeline guy. I know it well enough, I actually like it, but theorizing on it, not so much. However, I can see where these theories come from. The general consensus is that Spectacle Rock could tie all of the timelines together in a sense, or more so link them, leaving aside that all of these splits all stem from the same source, as chronologically, the first appearance of this rock would be Ocarina of Time. It's not the strongest or deepest theory, but an interesting point to consider. The variety of enemies in The Legend of Zelda is actually quite decent. You've got Tektites, Moblins, Gibdos, Darknuts, Linos, and so many others. But what if we told you that one of these enemies actually has a good variation? And by good, I don't mean like they're good at fighting, I mean they are good, as in on Link's side. An enemy which, rather than attacking Link, actually helps him. Imagine seeing that in Breath of the Wild, one of the Bokoblins just being like, "You're right, Link, gonna help you, innit?" Yeah, no, that doesn't happen. Well, in some of the caves found across the land, we can stumble upon a Moblin which says the following: "It's a secret to everybody," whilst presenting a rupee. These Moblins are giving Link rupees which can be used to buy bombs and other useful items, but why does this happen? Well, short answer, it's a reward for players finding these caves set by the developers, but if we are to think about this the Zeldatuber way and overthink things, then this could be an early sign that not all monsters actually agree with Ganon's ways. We see a similar example of this in Twilight Princess with King Moblin. Link battles the brute a few times throughout the course of the game, but after their final battle, rather than it ending with Link slaying the beast, the king actually admits defeat and explains that he was following the Legion of Ganondorf because he saw the Gerudo King as the most powerful side. But after Link bests him for the final time, he realizes that the hero is actually stronger and just walks away. It's definitely not connected, but it could be the same thing going on. Whatever the reason, the friendly Moblins of Zelda 1 are an awesome little secret and piece of video game history, as their iconic line, "It's a secret to everybody," has become quite well known in the video game industry.
Da 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 da. Transition effect. What am I doing with myself? Alright, Ganon wants Link to collect the Triforce pieces. Let's go. One of the greatest plot holes in Zelda 1, which nobody talks about, are the bosses. How come Ganon's minions are protecting the pieces of Triforce? They're supposed to be collecting the pieces of Triforce, right? Well, there's a theory made by the Zeldatuber Z Hyrule Fantasy, which explains that these bosses are actually not Ganon's minions. Rather, they are guardians put in place by Zelda to protect the Triforce from Ganon. This theory makes a lot of sense when you consider that the King of Hyrule did the exact same thing in Zelda 2. All that being said, if this is true, it begs the question, how does Ganon plan on beating Zelda's guardians and obtaining the Triforce of Wisdom? Well, since Ganon's minions are found throughout all of the dungeons of the game, it's safe to assume his first plan involved overwhelming each boss with his army. But for one reason or another, Ganon's army never went through with the plan. Maybe because they weren't strong enough, or because they did not have enough time to prepare. However, Ganon didn't need to look very hard for a second solution. It was none other than Link himself. If Ganon is as smart as we have deduced, then he probably figured out that Link is good at defeating dungeon bosses which his minions are unable to defeat. If that is the case, then Ganon wants Link to collect the full Triforce of Wisdom. That way, instead of going out of his way and collecting the Triforce himself, the Triforce can be brought to him. This explains why the old man stops Link from entering the final dungeon until he finishes the other 8 at the beginning of Ganon's labyrinth. Most people assume he's there to warn Link, but it's just as likely he's an agent of Ganon meant to trick Link into doing the King of Evil's dirty work. Think about it, most players die a lot while going through Ganon's lair. It's the toughest dungeon after all. If you believe in alternate universes and parallel realities, then every time you die, you create a timeline where Ganon wins and gets the Triforce of Wisdom. If you die 9 times while going through this dungeon and beat Ganon on your 10th life, That still means Ganon had a 9 in 10 chance of getting a free Triforce of Wisdom from you. If you ask me, I think Ganon has the better end of the deal here, and all he needs to do is wait.
This next one is sort of a theory, sort of a way of thinking, insert question mark, but an interesting one to consider, which I saw a lot of you guys bring up, and that is the idea that The Legend of Zelda could be closer to Breath of the Wild in the timeline than we all think. This is a Legend of Zelda theory, but will rely on Breath of the Wild to do the explaining. Now to be clear, yes, Breath of the Wild is more or less confirmed to be a sort of timeline merger, inevitable outcome, not under one specific timeline, aka the Nintendo translation. It scrapped the traditional timeline and basically began so far ahead of these games it created a clean slate for games to come. But there are still theories around trying to connect it to a specific timeline, and this is one of them. So as we know, Breath of the Wild, in fact, it is the first truly open world Zelda game since the very first one. This one, which is the basis for the theory. So in the past, we've saw theories connecting the game to the adult timeline due to all the salt found in the game, and its description hinting at the Great Sea from the Wind Waker. We saw theories connecting it to the child timeline through this Mirror of Twilight lookalike ruins, and we have seen theories connecting it to the downfall via the appearance of Lynels. But one that you might not have heard yet is that Breath of the Wild may take place at the end or around the end of the downfall timeline, as it is essentially a reimagining of The Legend of Zelda. That's not an assumption either, it was even outright said by the devs. Not just that, but in a way it kinda makes sense. Breath of the Wild's plot very much fits the whole downfall thing, but maybe a long while after these games, which is where the suggestion of this basically being tens of thousands of years after the original Zelda comes from. It isn't very deep or complex, but it is certainly interesting to think about considering the games are very similar in a sense. And whilst making Breath of the Wild, they made a prototype based on Zelda 1 because it was a reimagining. They literally said this. Possibly enough to connect them? Personally, I think not, but it's a little theory I saw which I found creatively interesting. Thanks a ton for watching, I really hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, be sure to drop a like and consider subscribing for more Zelda content. A huge thanks to the amazing Bread Pirate for joining me on this one. He is another amazing Zelda creator who has recently been hitting the Zelda scene and makes very impressive and entertaining content. We did another video over on his channel going over 25 problems with The Legend of Zelda, which was an absolute blast, so be sure to check it out through the card or link below. As always, a huge heartfelt thank you goes out to all of my supporters across Patreon and YouTube. I cannot express to you enough how helpful and appreciated the support is. And special mention to our newest member, Hope for Dust. I really appreciate the support. If you'd like to join them here at the end of all of my videos, get yourself a shout out upon joining and more, then consider supporting via Patreon or YouTube. Again, thanks for watching, and until the next time, I've been Hyrule Gamer.
Aren't you still Hyrule Gamer? It's not like you stop being Hyrule Gamer when the video ends, right?
Bye.